I want to thank all three of you for being with us. I want to begin by making a reference to last night's dinner, which I think most people were at. And at that dinner, you heard top editors at the Times address, among other issues, the profound skepticism that many Americans feel toward the media. Although not nearly to the same degree, many Americans have diminished regard for and faith in college. Where does that Venn diagram overlap? What are the shared sins of higher education and the media? Any one of you? Ruth, can we start with you?
Well, I think it's quite apparent that there are a host of people who feel left out. And what we see around the country is a reaction to, and to a certain degree, anger at institutions that promote the idea that I am unworthy somehow because I hold the wrong ideas, because my lifestyle is not appropriate in some way, because I'm not smart enough. I think that in general, people want that. We talk about inclusiveness all the time, but we don't really mean it. When we say inclusion, we mean inclusion if you agree with me and if you believe in the same things. But we are so diverse and we believe in a lot of different things, some of which are admittedly pretty heinous things, but still we're part of the human family. And the trick for us in higher education is to figure out a way to promote the values that we believe in, the standards that we know to be important, and at the same time make people feel included in that.
Yeah, and to build on that, higher education has historically and is still been an important bridge to opportunity and such an engine for economic and social mobility. And for many people that seems inaccessible. Either it doesn't meet the needs, or it doesn't seem like it's a place for me, or it's unaffordable. And so building on that, I think it just writ large as a system, there's a view that it's not keeping up, it's not supporting and meeting the needs of students, and therefore one's ability to access the American dream is perceived as less.
So, Margaret, are there plausible, concrete fixes that can work on the problems that Ruth and Alan just identified?
Well, sure. With respect to accessing the American dream, completion, all of that, and we'll talk about a good bit of it. I think with respect to the ideological differences and the diversity of views and the things that Senator Alexander was talking about, really, I'm pretty optimistic about it. I oversee 16 universities, and it seems like everybody's free to speak and does so. And in our legislature, at student bodies, speaker. I don't think we should overstate this issue. College campuses are now and have always been, the primary American forum for grist in the mill, and that's what's happening. And I think people through social media and otherwise, they feel emboldened, empowered to express their views as well. And I think that's all. It's not as dire as it seems, honestly. And I think, college students and Americans generally are pretty discerning about what's junk and what isn't, for the most part.
But there are those edges, Margaret, where people take from those comments and take them to the extreme. The question is, how do we moderate that behavior? Because we're seeing the violence that is the consequence of it. I grew up at a time when I couldn't walk down the street without being harassed.
Right.
I think we have to deal with the fact that we are exacerbating the condition that some people have for that kind of behavior, and that's what we are not able to find a way to moderate.
With respect to the access to the American dream deal, I do think, one of the economic divide, we read about it every day, that seems like, the poles are getting, further apart. And, affordability, completion, access, just all of those things seem to make higher education farther and farther away for a lot of people.
You have all sort of in some ways addressed us making people feel bad, or you talked particularly about that, Ruth. I wonder, do we talk so much about college and college as the key to social mobility that we fetishize it in a way that makes those people who are looking at other pathways or who haven't been to college feel ashamed, anxious, and then in turn have this negative feeling toward college?
I mean, I just think we have to be real careful about that because, you know, when I hear people say that, you know, some people need to go to, you know, trade school. When you say, well, what do you want for your child? Well, I want my child to go to Chapel Hill.
Right.
But somebody else's kid can go to trade school and maybe get in and get out and whatnot. We really need to be afraid of what's underneath that, especially now.
And I think college is, we talk about it as if it's a monolithic kind of institution when it is a range of institutions, whether it's technical schools, community colleges, four-year institutions. And so I think when you frame it in this kind of narrow view and tend to kind of reference it as the elite colleges, I do think that that causes the type of angst and concern and question when, in fact, it's a range of institutions that we should be focused on and very much all focused on the success of students.
Yeah.
But it's our fault because we savage this continuum of education from the time students start school all the way through college. There's some good places and some not so good places. There's some good schools and not so good schools. So we have made it impossible for people to feel that wherever they are is worthy because they're doing the work of education.
Right.
And, you know, to be educated in a segregated school and to have wonderful teachers and to be able to take that and make something of it was a wonderful thing that I didn't feel bad about. So why are we making people feel bad about the fact that they're in underperforming schools and that they are going to a college that's a two-year college? Educators are primarily responsible for this, I would say.
I thought you were going to say the media.
And the media.
We accept some blame here, yeah.
So this elitism is pernicious
Yeah.
in our line of work.
Yes.
Because the fact is, as long as students are picking up the utensils of learning and doing the work, they can go all the way from a GED to the best research university in the country. That's the great thing about the educational system in this country is you can actually do that. So we don't need to fetishize and we don't need to build these pillars. We just need to make sure that students continue to love to learn and they stay in school and they press on wherever they are. And that's the message we need to be sending.
This is where our resistance to accountability and measurement has, I think, hurt the academy. Because we've been focused on brands. Everybody wants their child to go to Harvard or, you know, Brown or wherever. But, you know, the people who were really punching above their weight are community colleges, our comprehensive universities, our HBCUs, et cetera. And we haven't been able to tell our story because we don't have a, you know, a fact base to work
Well,
from.
I was going to ask you, it strikes me that polls show Americans have a much more positive feeling toward community colleges than they do toward four-year institutions. What's the moral in that? What can four-year institutions learn from that?
Well, I think that community colleges have done a much better job both being responsive to the community, being tied and at least engaging with the local labor market and being responsive to those needs. I also think that they set the pace for focusing on things like completion. Community colleges are typically open access or almost always open access. So they focused on completion, they focused on students, and they've taken those steps to really make the transformation to meet the needs of students that show up at their doors. So there's a favorability for that, and you know, that does show up in the polls.
Why aren't four-year institutions doing that?
Oh, that's a long.
Well,
I'll give you a whole 45 seconds.
Okay. My own theory about that is the competition that developed among institutions after World War II because of the availability of US research dollars has created a nightmare for us in this country where every institution is trying to play in that league virtually.
Yeah.
And what that means is that they abandon the mission of trying to help the students where they are in search of the higher level of scholarship and research so that they can have access to those dollars. And so I think of that, you know, when I started out, we actually had state colleges that were supposed to be teaching institutions. It was a great thing. That was the aspiration. And many of them have now moved into this competition with major research universities for research dollars. And when you start to do that, you change how your orientation toward teaching. You change your orientation toward the admission of students. I think that's what happened. And so to go back and reevaluate what we're doing in terms of teaching institutions, I think would be a wonderful
What are
change.
some of the ways institutions are competing against each other, to your point, that they should abandon, that are just estranging them from the public and not serving students?
Well, faculty and scholars want to work at places like Ruth describes.
Right.
And so we have sort of devalued, it's not unlike in K-12 education, teaching for its own sake. And so, then there's kind of a race to the bottom that Ruth talks about that can kind of take hold. But I mean, I think the people who are really doing the work every day are, the comprehensives and the community colleges. I mean, the elite research universities, they're going to be fine. They do create jobs. We love them to death, and all of that. But, if we're going to have, the drive to 55 met in Tennessee or whatever it is in any given state, the people who are going to do the work are our community colleges, our comprehensive universities, and our HBCUs. And there's plenty of work for everybody.
Ellen, you wanted to say something?
No, I completely agree with that. That's the point I was going to make. Yeah.
We talk a lot, or more and more, about how colleges can prove their worth in terms of job placement, economically and all that, and what their role is there. Should we be talking a lot more, and should colleges be advertising their role in preparing more enlightened citizens and better caretakers of our democracy, especially at this moment in time?
I think that we have the conversations about that as if those are mutually exclusive. I definitely think a good start for accountability or assessing how our higher ed systems are performing is looking at indicators like access and progression and completion, and then post-college indicators like employment and earnings. We can do that and have the debate about what else should we be looking at to assess the value of higher ed, and we can add those things later. But I think when you survey Americans, 9 out of 10 expect students that graduate from high school to do some type of post-secondary education, and yet only 1 in 4 believe that higher education is fine as it is. And when you dig underneath that, it tends to the comments and the information and data tend to say, it's because we're not sure that they're preparing our students for jobs and the economy and mobility, and we think it costs too much. So I think we can start there to assess how we're doing, and we can add these other kind of important questions, as we figure them out.
Amen. And people don't want to send their kid to college to, the reason they send their kid to college is to get a job, especially if it's going to cost, a couple $100,000. That's what your parents wanted, Frank.
I think the reasons are I think they're more varied than that.
Well, I
think they're more
do, but above all, for this kind of investment, what is my career path? What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to support myself? And yes, these other things are great byproducts, need to happen, that's what we do. But I don't know about you, but I mean, I think people go and invest in their career and their livelihood.
Springing off of that, during the Obama administration, the college scorecard came out. There's also been a piece of legislation kicking around from Ron Wyden and Marco Rubio called the College Right to Know Act, I think, in which everyone would be required to say, here's how much my students paid, here's what they majored in, here's how much they made income 5-10 years down the road. Is that a good kind of transparency, or is that a dangerous road to go down?
No, it's good.
good.
What's bad about that? The more transparent we are, the better. Because in this confusing world today, there are very few places where you can be assured that you're getting the truth. I brought this button. Truth, it's more important now than ever.
We hand these out in the green room.
In the green room. Be sure to get one. I'm wearing this button because
We're going to raffle some off later.
universities need to do their darndest to be bastions of truth because there is so much skepticism today about whether anybody's capable of telling the truth. So we mustn't hide anything. Obviously, there are certain areas that remain confidential, but how we do what we do, why wouldn't we say that?
Can I play devil's advocate for one moment?
Sure.
Okay.
You won't win, but go ahead.
I'm prepared to lose.
Okay.
He's prepared to lose. That's great.
A, does that not send a message, maybe too much of a message, that the purpose of college is vocational? But even more important, aren't the colleges who are going to look like the best investments on that kind of scorecard or right-to-know information the ones who who have the best students, who have students who were destined for those incomes irrelevant of where they went to school?
So
Not
I think we
necessarily.
can figure those things out.
Yeah, definitely.
Going to college is probably one of the most important decisions and biggest investments in one's life. And the question is, should you have as much information as you need to make an informed decision? And I think the answer is just unequivocally yes. So, having data and having that information, I think, is a good thing, and it is a public good. We can manage the downsides of it. I think there are downsides that have to be managed, but I don't think that should get in the way of taking those really important steps to make it widely available so that as I'm making a decision for me or my family, it's as informed as possible.
And I personally think that we ought to go beyond this and have a unit record system. I think the Academy has come a long way in the last 10 years or so since we've been talking about this. We need it to describe our value proposition and to say that this is an investment that's worth making.
And besides, could I just add, universities today are teetering on the edge of credibility for a lot of people.
Yeah. You think it's that bad?
Absolutely, because of this issue of whether or not we are engaged in misrepresentation of what we do.
You're making a false promise.
Yeah.
Well, in so many different areas. And so I think this is critical to our continued credibility and our ability to be over a long span of time, the kinds of institutions that we have been to society. We have to preserve that. It's invaluable to universities to be seen as doing credible research, as being credible in teaching, as being credible when we say we are offering opportunity to students who come from the edges of society. We shouldn't be lying about those things, and anything we can do to open up what we're doing and expose the way we do it is, in my view, to the good.
Two political ideas that have gained a lot of currency, they were mentioned or alluded to in Kate's discussion with Senator Alexander. Free community college and free tuition at public universities. How do you feel about those proposals?
I want to say one quick thing. Okay, so Tennessee has done, as he bragged on,
Yeah.
And that last dollar program, it's cost them about $6 million. We in North Carolina are investing about twice that to have $500 a semester tuition for in-state students at 3 of our universities. One HBCU college for Native, that was founded as a teaching college for Native Americans, and then Western Carolina University. So it's an even bigger idea, and we're starting it this fall, and I hope you'll write about it, Frank. But yeah.
It's on me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But yeah, no, I think those are good ideas, but I don't think it should be free college for everyone. Look, as Senator Alexander said, it's virtually free for those who need it the most, who need financial aid most. Free for everybody is a hell of a subsidy for a lot of middle class and wealthier families that can damn sure afford to go to college.
And I think that, I think it's good to see the experimentation in different states. And we're going to learn a lot from that. But when you only focus on kind of free tuition or free community college, it does miss a fundamental point that many students show up at these institutions and need additional supports, and it's not just a financial issue. It can be academic preparedness. It can be other types of supports that help students succeed. So if you're truly focused on student success and getting them across the finish line, then you need to contemplate these other needs beyond tuition to make that investment, to get the return on the investment that I think we owe our young people.
I just don't think free tuition for universities is. I mean, how do you afford that?
I don't know. Bernie Sanders says we can.
We love Bernie, but
We do.
anyway.
Moving right along.
In terms of community college, I don't see anything wrong with offering free access and tuition at community colleges. It seems to me that's a very worthy thing to do. What I don't want is for us to get into the mindset that we're going to have a system of education in this country that is routinized and that is cookie cutter, because the rest of the world has that. And they very much envy the diversity of approaches that we use here because of the outperformance of higher education in this country. So I think one has to be very careful in trying to mandate doing the same thing across the board, because I don't think it ends up with necessarily the best outcome.
Is higher education too often being asked to answer for the sins and shortcomings of K through 12? And if so, whether fair or not, is there anything higher education, people in higher education should be doing and can do to improve that pipeline?
Yes, yes, yes. Our teacher prep programs have suffered from a lack of attention, a lack of hewing to what we know works with respect to teaching little children how to read, and lots of other things that have been, decided in the academy. And so, we have a real gap between what we know works and what we're teaching our teacher candidates. And, we have underinvested in recruiting the kind of talented people we need to be teachers. And, teacher colleges are sort of an afterthought because of what Ruth is talking about. We're all chasing Research One status, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not where the big money is. But yes, there's something we can do, and that is make sure that every teacher that goes into our public schools, is fully prepared, able to be successful with a diverse, challenged student body when they get there.
There's something else we can do, and that is we can care. Higher education, if I'm a teacher in higher education, don't call me a teacher, call me a professor. I want to be different from those teachers in K through 12 because I am smarter, I'm better. That's pernicious again. So we ought to embrace the entire continuum of education. The more we look to K through 12 to improve on what is happening there, the better off we're going to be, the more money we're going to save, and the better we'll serve the public if we do that. But an end to this elitism is very much a part of solving that problem.
Yeah, and I think both in the form of partnerships, when you look at an example like the University of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools, that's a fantastic example of a partnership between higher ed and the K through 12 system to help the K through 12 system just continuously improve. I also think there is a role for creating coherence for the student. If you were truly focused on student success, higher ed would, as an institution, reach back into the K through 12 system and send clear, coherent signals and pathways that say to students, this is a place for you. We're going to do everything we can to help you succeed. And it would be a relentless focus on student success. So there's plenty of low-hanging fruit there to just fundamentally improve and transform the connection and relationship between K-12 and higher ed.
And I want to give one example of that. So about half the states have an advanced placement or international baccalaureate acceptance policy that's coherent, that says to a kid, I've got a 4 in physics and it's good in any public university.
Yeah.
And about half the states don't, and we're one of them. So that it's a grab bag of a kid who's first generation trying to figure out, does this count here or there? Will I get 2 over here but not 1? It's a crazy quilt that we expect our users to navigate. And if states invest in teacher training and paying for tests, as North Carolina does for advanced placement, then let's give the kids credit when they come into our universities.
But the only way to
For
get the
example.
states to all align would be with some federal edict, right? Would you want that?
No, I mean, half the states have uniform credit acceptance policies for students who are doing college-level work in high school. And states can and should do that, and I hope we will.
We've been talking more and more in recent years about getting socioeconomic diversity at colleges, making sure that opportunity at some of the most competitive colleges available to low-income kids. I don't hear us talking nearly as much about completion. Why is that, and what is the conversation we should be having about completion?
I mean, throughput is the name of the game. I mean, we have all gotten used to these 6-year graduation rates. We got to start talking about 4 years. I commend Senator Alexander and his 3-year kind of effort. this year-round Pell, those sorts of things, just time is money.
I don't know why we're not talking about it, except that the places that do exceedingly well on that don't need to talk about it.
Right.
The places that don't do well are
Don't wanna
embarrassed
talk
to
about
talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it doesn't happen. However, there is a recent study done by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that really talks about the importance today. It used to be we talked about access. That was the most important conversation we were having in higher education. Today, we ought to be talking about completion.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely where the discussion is today. How do we move students through the pipeline, given all the issues that we're dealing with? At my university, we have a huge number of students who are Pell Grant eligible. And so most of us don't understand what it's like to be desperately poor. And when you're desperately poor, it isn't that easy to make your way through college, even if you have financial aid. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
Because if something comes up where you require $100, that can stop you, and so forth. So I think that there are all these other problems that we have not acknowledged that get in the way of completion, and we need to start acknowledging those.
And I think that there's the talking about completion, and what we're inspired by, and I'm personally inspired by, are the institutions that are actually doing and working on completion. University of Central Florida, Florida International University, UT Austin. I mean, they are focused on completion, and so they're well beyond the conversation. I do think that there is an opportunity in the broader public to have the dialogue, but there are hundreds and hundreds of institutions across the country that are focused on this and are taking, really important and bold steps to improve their completion rates for all students.
And I think we all have to recognize, I'm not sure the public does, that we're serving a student that needs a lot more support than the valedictorian from a suburban neighborhood who was the college goer of times past. Mm-hmm. We're trying to get damn near everybody a post-secondary credential. And it's a different client, if you will. I know we hate to talk about our students like that, who need different kind of supports and services.
I'm going to ask one more question, then if you have a question in the audience, you can email to q@nytimes.com, or we're going to have some mic runners in the audience, and you can stand up and ask your question. The Atlantic magazine recently wrote something, and I had missed what they were referring to. They noted that last year, the nation crossed an ominous milestone, and for the first time, public colleges and universities in most states received more revenue from tuition than from government appropriations. Yeah. Is there anything people in higher ed can do to bring that vanished state money or some of it back?
Happily, North Carolina is not one of those states. I mean, we're a very high-spending state. 65% of our funding comes. It's the envy of the nation. So I'm happy about that. But I do think there's a reason why we're the global innovator and have higher ed institutions that are the envy of the world, because we've invested in them. And it's just like our highway systems and things like that. I mean, we are under-investing in the seed corn that will make us prosperous in the future.
So how do we get more of that investment back?
Make our case, show, data, community connectedness.
I also think, though, that we see that institutions are doing things every day to use the resources that they have more effectively and focusing and to the benefit of students. So an example of that is creating, clear pathways for students so that they don't waste time and money taking courses that they don't need. So just clear coherence. If you want to be a nurse, this is how you do it. These are the sequence of the classes you take. If you're not prepared, we're going to do that in a way that helps you take credit-bearing courses and get the kind of remedial education you need, whether that's in math or English language arts. So there are things that, as we're having the discussion and debate about the investment in higher education, that we can do to support student success and support the institution to be, much more financially viable.
I think also we can be more prudent in our expenditures. And the day that I started visiting campuses and seeing, forgive me, climbing walls, and doodads.
Don't forget the
and,
lazy rivers.
lazy rivers. Every fantasy that you can imagine, or that we can imagine for our students. I think the public and legislators are losing patience with the decisions that we make. What is the core? What are the core needs, and how are they being met? And I think that the kind of arms race that we've been involved in universities to make things so much more attractive here so that you won't go there, is crazy. Yeah. We've got to get back to the essentials and prove that we are worthy of the support that citizens give us, because otherwise, wherever we are today, it's going to be a lot tougher for us tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Questions from the audience? I can't see that well.
Nice. Lights.
Here's the thing up here.
Good morning. I'm Kim Beatty, Chancellor at Metropolitan Community College in Kansas City. I really want to thank the panelists and their perspective. I was sharing with colleagues here that I think it's really a comment, not necessarily a question. I think what's missing is that we don't have, the gentleman mentioned earlier, the diverse voice of higher education at the table in this conversation. Community colleges, in terms of the conversation about completion and funding, those are intertwined in a lot of states that have performance funding. In Texas, and now I'm in Missouri, where 26% of my budget is coming, and completion is at the top of the list of conversations. And then when you talk about reaching into high schools and the work that has to happen, community colleges are at the core of that. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the guests that are here. I'd like to see us explore broader, diverse representation of the perspectives of what higher education represents, so that we can have a total comprehensive conversation, which has been alluded to by some of the panelists.
Thank you.
Good point.
Can someone
Here's
bring a
someone
microphone over here?
on the screen.
Hi, I'm Kathy Gibson with APL NextEd. I'm delighted to hear you talk about the importance of teaching, but practically speaking, how do we take a generation of faculty, or many generations of faculty, who have been told that research is the path to personal and professional success? How do we help them see the importance of teaching, or how do we educate the next generation to be focused on teaching in higher education? I see actually models in high school that are far superior to teaching that's happening at university. I see college students coming who've done flipped classroom learning in their sciences and in their math, coming to university and having somebody lecture to them and wondering, what's wrong with my professor. So what are your ideas about how you practically, how do you practically create opportunity and interest by and through faculty to become better teachers?
Move the cheese. And I mean, let's create some incentives to do different things. And one of the things that I've been really surprised about is how little money it takes. And you put $1 million competitive grant out to 16 universities to do some things like this, course redesign and whatnot. And, they come, and for, relatively speaking, small amounts of money to do that, because we are incenting a different kind of behavior.
Yeah, and I think you go and visit many institutions across the country who have already made this transformation. I, in November, was with Bill and Melinda Gates at the University of Central Florida. They have figured this out. And the things that they've done is they've invested in faculty development and saying, here's the ranges of pedagogy that you can use to engage students in fundamentally different ways and to improve kind of the outcomes that students have and meet their needs. They don't mandate it in a way that feels threatening, so they create the types of incentives. They recruit faculty that have this orientation, so they use a number of strategies to do it. And I mean, they're just nailing the student outcomes. The faculty is engaged. So I would say go to a university that's done this and learn from them, and get some ideas, and then figure out how you do it in your own context.
I apologize we didn't get to more questions, but we're actually out of time. Thank you all so incredibly much for your insights and your wisdom, and for being with us in the first place. Thank you.